Hello, everybody. Let's get started. Markets are down pretty big today. Dow Jones down 0.7%. Nasdaq down 2.2%. S&P 500 down 1.3%. Russell 2000 down about 0.6%. The drop is primarily driven by Max 7 companies, especially Nvidia, after some White House actions. We're going to get into that. Oil prices are up 2% to $62 per barrel. Treasury yield is down a couple of basis points, especially on the shorter end a little bit. 5-year is 3.94, 10-year is 4.31, and the 30-year is at 4.77%. Retail sales came in slightly higher than expected for March. I think there's some pull forward of especially auto sales in March. As you remember, auto tariffs were one of the first ones to kick in. So I think as those headlines proliferated, folks went to dealerships and bought some cars. I don't think Tesla was heavily impacted by this. I think Tesla's headwinds are kind of unique to the company, but overall, the industry in general did well in March. But I think that's going to be some sort of a headache on the other side of it in April, May, June. Maybe April will be better too, because I think these automakers have 2 to 3 months of inventory that was sourced before the tariffs kicked in. So we're going to really see the impact of these auto sales in the automotive industry in Q3, really, June, starting June, let's say. All right, let's continue with the Reuters article of the day. The summary of what's going on. Wall Street tumbles, Nvidia slumps after new US chip export controls. Wall Street's main indices slid on Wednesday, with chip makers leading declines as Nvidia warned of steep charges from new US curbs on its chip exports to China, making it one of the biggest casualties of the trade war between the two countries. Global chip stocks took a battering on fresh evidence that US President Donald Trump's shift in trade policy was muddying the outlook for the sector, including heavyweights Nvidia and AMD. The US Commerce Department issued new export licensing requirements for Nvidia's H20 and AMD's MI308 artificial intelligence chips to China. Nvidia said it faces $5.5 billion in charges after the restrictions, while AMD said it expects $800 million hit, which is really interesting because Dan Ives was, I believe, on Bloomberg TV today, talking about how AMD is going to get hit more from this before AMD announced its number. I think Nvidia announced its number of $5.5 billion in charges, which is inventory write-downs and some cancellations of purchase agreements, I think. And then Dan Ives went on Bloomberg and said something like, it's going to impact AMD more. When asked which company would get hit more, he said AMD. And AMD then came out with a number of $800 million hit, which is almost an order of magnitude lower than Nvidia. So I don't know how maybe his understanding of the two companies is a little off. Maybe something else is going on. Who knows? Shares of both companies slumped, with Nvidia, the third largest US company by market value, down 7%. AMD shares lost 6%. Other chip stocks also lost ground, with the broader semiconductor index down 3.5%. Yeah. I mean, I think all of these companies are overvalued anyway. And, it's kind of odd to me that with Chinese buyers accelerating their purchases in recent months, anticipating this tariff war to eventually hit the semiconductor index, semiconductor companies or the industry, let's say. Even with all that forward pooling of purchases, how do you still have $5.5 billion in inventory with H20? And Jensen obviously has been in meetings with Trump a bunch of times, so it's really quite odd. The level of the hit that Nvidia is taking is really, really odd to me. It should be an order of magnitude less, like AMD. And I think Nvidia is just looking to blame Trump tariffs for their deteriorating fundamentals, which are already deteriorating for the last several quarters. I think they're just using this as an opportunity here. Shares AMD lost 6%. Other chip stocks were also lost ground. The long-term outlook for Nvidia and the rest of the chip sector is extremely strong, but there's going to be this shroud over the industry for a while as it tries to negotiate with China over trade. Said Tim Grisky, senior portfolio strategist, and Ingela Snyder. Okay, that's what Dan I said as well. I don't share that view at all. I don't share the view at all with sell side analysts. I think Nvidia has peaked, and there are many other companies coming and doing basically what they're doing now, let alone AMD with their MI3 on the series. But AMD has new products coming, new product cycles coming very quickly, closer and closer. Which each cycle, AMD is getting closer and closer to Nvidia's capabilities. And there's also a lot of startups doing the same thing. And on the other side, Chinese companies have quite a few products coming to market soon too. So I think Nvidia stock has peaked very substantially here, and it's headed down. Dutch chip making tools giant ASML also warned that the tariffs had led to increased uncertainty about its outlook, sending US listed shares down 5%. The US export controls are the latest escalation in tensions between the world's two largest economies, which have imposed a series of higher tit for tat tariffs on imports in the past few weeks. I'm sure that this isn't the last salvo that we'll see from China or from the US towards China, Grishke said. Investors will all now closely monitor this speech by US Fed Chair Jerome Powell later in the day for indications on how central bank will respond to market volatility as well as growth worries. Let's see when he's talking. Give me 1 second. Today, Powell is speaking at 1:30 p.m. Eastern time, so in about 20 minutes. If there are no other questions or comments, we'll probably end it by then. He will address the Economic Club of Chicago, focusing on U.S. economic outlook amid recent trade policy developments and market volatility. I suspect, and here's my prediction for today, Powell's speech. Okay. Let's see. Let's put down some bets here. April 16, 2025. Bet. I think so. This is, I think, Powell's probably last speech before the next meeting, right? And 21 days. When does the next Fed blackout period start? The period begins midnight Eastern on second Saturday before a meeting and ends noon Eastern the day after the meeting concludes. During this time, next meeting scheduled for May 6, 7. So that would be starting Saturday, 2026. So we have 10 more days of Fed speech. I suspect that Powell will signal, how should I word this? Signal a pause for May. Okay. Let's see. Powell signals pause for May meeting. And there might be a hint of dovishness for after May, though. Simply because simply because the last round of inflation numbers came in lower than people expected. But the overarching, but then the overwhelming um, factor that's going on right now, obviously, is tariffs. The policy imposing and highlights uncertainty due to tariffs. Okay, due to tariff wars, which I mean, it's not even close to being done. I don't think. So there's about I guess 100 countries that are trying to negotiate with. And if you have your bets, if you have your take on what Powell will say in about 20 minutes, throw it down in a reply to the space or in the live chat, and then we can compare notes. Um, so I think Powell signals post for May meeting highlights uncertainty due to tariffs, points to strong employment market. Okay, points to I don't think I want to say strong here. Maybe balanced. Um, Steady. I don't know. Um, Steady or balanced employment market. I don't know. And then I mean the U3 rate is very low, and even the U6 came down last time. So the jobs were higher than expected. Um, and then maybe inflation expectations, and then he's going to say something like, we're going to focus inflation expectations, longer run inflation expectations, well anchored, even though near term has risen. Even in the market base, I think has risen. Let me see for a second. Uh, let's see. 1 year inflation break even. 2.9%. Yeah. So even the 1 year inflation expectation for April, 2.9%. This is from Federal Reserve Bank of Cleveland. So that's that. And then let's look at the 5 year. We're looking at 2.3. I mean, 5 to 10 years seems fine. So longer run, inflation remains well anchored. We're going to say longer run uh, inflation expectations well anchored. Um, there was, I think, one Fed president that said something like, he doesn't believe these inflation rises due to tariffs will translate to, but I don't think Powell will go that far. I don't think he'll call this. I don't think Powell will go that far. So, and then we're going to watch. So that's the bet. Okay. Powell signals polls for May, highlights uncertainty due to tariffs, points to steady balance employment market, and long inflation expectation well anchored. If I get all of those, then I win this bet. And then I'm going to be watch for, let's see, watch for comments around um, transitory transitoriness of inflation surge in 2025, 5 and 6. Okay. I mean, there's no question. Like if anybody claims that inflation isn't rising this year, they're just. I don't think they are being fair. But the question is, what happens after that, really? So let's see. Let's see what Powell says in about 10 minutes on that front. All right, continue with the Reuters article. Unless if there are any questions, comments, you can leave it in a comments below or in the YouTube live chat. Separately, Trump ordered an investigation into potential new tariffs of all critical minerals imports. Data showed U.S. March retail sales rose 1.4%, higher than expected, but that did little to lift sentiment. Yeah. Yeah, because it's written off as pull forward of demand, especially in autos. Amid growth worries, investors are hawk-eyed about the results from companies this earnings season. United Airlines gained 3% after the company reported stable bookings despite forecasting lower profit for the current quarter. Insurance bellwether Travelers rose 4%, limited losses on the Dow after reporting stronger than expected first quarter profit. Tesla fell 2% after Reuters reported that Trump tariffs on Chinese parts have disrupted the EV maker's production plans. We're going to go into that as well. Advanced issues outnumbered declines by 1.4 to 1 on both markets, Nasdaq and NYSE. Okay, let's run through the exclusive Reuters article on Trump tariffs. On Chinese parts or cybercab semi disrupt Tesla US production plant sources, which is complete bullshit because these products weren't going to be produced in any volume this year anyway. So there's really no delay. There's no need for a $25,000 Tesla vehicle in the near term because the used cars are going for about $10,000 anyway. Like a couple of year old used Teslas are going, a Model 3 going for 15,000, Model Y is now going for 20,000. However, for Model Y prices are sliding below 20,000. So what in the world is the reason to pay $50,000, $60,000 for Teslas? And Tesla is really is going to get this effect on new car sales, if a huge impact on new Model 3 and Model Y sales if they bring about another $25,000-$30,000 vehicle, which they are barely profitable. Like those Model Y is barely profitable. In China, none of the Tesla vehicles are profitable. Cybertruck is going downhill for various reasons, and I think that program is going to end soon. The Model 3, after 1 year of a major refresh, it had to bring about 0% interest rates, low lease rates. So that kind of goes to show how low the demand for the vehicle is. And if you put on top of that a low price vehicle, which is not going to be nearly as profitable as those other ones, you're going to kill your income statement and your balance sheet. So I don't think that's going to work. So just like any other company, any other management, Tesla is not any different. They're blaming Trump tariffs for delays, for lack of execution, and we're going to see many examples of this throughout the earnings season. A lot of companies will, just like Nvidia just did, for a $5.5 billion charge, which is obviously absurd, especially with AMD coming out with $800 million. I mean, that's an order of magnitude more. And they're not saying our Hopper chips, nobody wants them anymore at those absurd prices. So we're going to write it down. We were going to write it down anyway, and this way we can't blame Trump. Is the real story there, I think. Tesla's plans to ship components from China to Cybercab and semi-electric trucks in the U.S. were suspended after President Trump raised tariffs on Chinese goods amid a trade war. Said a person with direct knowledge. The move could disrupt Tesla's plan to start mass production of the much-anticipated models, which its CEO Elon Musk has been touting to investors as major innovations providing growth momentum of the U.S. automaker. Tesla was ready to absorb the additional costs when Trump imposed a 34% tariff on Chinese goods, but could not do so when the tariff went beyond that, leaving shipping plans suspended, said the person, who declined to be named as the matter is private. Trump raised additional tariffs to 84% on April 9 and has since increased that to 125%, bringing the total tariff Chinese goods export to US to 145%, which, by the way, I think that jumped this morning, something like 200-something percent. Which after a level is kind of meaningless because you stopped all trade anyway. So you can't say 1,000%, doesn't matter. The company was scheduled to start receiving component shipments in the upcoming months with the goal of starting trial production of the 2 models in October and mass production in 2026, the person said. Bullshit. The Cybercab to be produced in Texas and Semi in Nevada. It was not clear how long the suspension will last. Tesla has, for the past 2 years, been increasing the proportion of parts sourced from North America for its US factories in view of potential US tariffs in China, the source and the second person said. Speaking on Monday at the White House, Trump said he was considering a modification to 25% tariffs imposed on foreign auto and auto parts imports from Mexico, Canada, and other places. Those tariffs would raise the cost of a car by thousands of dollars, and Trump said car companies need a little bit of time because they're going to make them here. They're going to need years to do that, and by then he'll be out of the office. Tesla didn't respond to requests for comment. Tesla has been seeking approvals from state governments as it plans to roll out robotaxi service with a fleet of cybercabs. It unveiled October a robotaxi concept that had no steering wheel, a control pillars, and promised to start building the two-door model 2026 at the price less than $30,000 bullshit. Tesla also plans to ramp up production of semi-electric trucks in 2026 and accelerate deliveries of long overdue orders to customers, including Pepsi. The impact on the key business plans for Tesla reflected how Trump's tariffs, which were meant to boost US local manufacturing, has hurt its political ally Musk, who has repeatedly said on social media posts X he supported free trade and objected tariffs. White House says Musk's task with overseeing US bureaucracy overhaul that has eliminated jobs of thousands of government employees. Musk, who posted a video illustrating how it requires the global supply chain to make a pencil, and made personal appeal to Trump to reverse sweeping new tariffs worldwide. Washington Post reported last week. Tesla has also stopped taking new orders for Model S and X as China imposed retaliatory 125%. I mean, no one was buying Model S and X in China anyway. They sell better vehicles for half the price in China. US accounted for about 15 to 20% of the value of exports to Chinese auto components in recent years, S&P said. The US accounted for about 20% by value of exports of Chinese auto components in recent years. Okay. All right, so that's that. Any questions, comments, please request to speak. Otherwise, we're going to end the space in about 5 minutes. Any questions, comments, please request to speak or leave a comment on YouTube. Otherwise, we're going to end the space. I like keeping this short and sweet. We talked about NVIDIA. We touched on macro. Nothing really new here. All the March data is being pushed aside because of what happened on April 2nd and the first week of April, really. Retail sales were up slightly better than expected, driven mostly by forward pulling of auto purchases from Q2 to March. Industrial production was down in March. I think companies are really pulling back on capital investment and production. They want to see what happens in the next few months. And I think this is going to take a few months. I mean, China is still escalating. I don't think that's going to change. I think China is being a bit more creative with their side. Instead of going 100%, 200%, 300% on tariffs, they're going, well, now we're not going to buy Boeing. I think Tesla might be in the next group of news here, but who knows? Tesla isn't making money in China anyway, so it doesn't really matter. Business inventories were up slightly, but lower than expected. That's for February. And AHP Housing Market Index for April was still very low, 40. Let me see if there's any other news on the Tesla front in the next couple of minutes here. Grant, what's your question?
Was curious for your thoughts on the information article around the Model 2 probably not happening.
Yeah, we talked about that. I mean, it's just, I haven't seen the article. I don't think that counts. I mean, I've been saying for years that there's no reason for Tesla to be offering cheaper vehicles because the used Tesla prices have been sinking so fast that it doesn't make sense. I mean, people would just buy the used car at $10,000, $15,000 as opposed to paying 25, 30 for something with less range, less capability, but newer, a couple of years newer. It just doesn't make sense. So it's years out.
Yeah, kind of agree. Do you think that's going to be a big driver of the stock price down? I am curious on that in particular.
Is what going to be big driver?
Them coming clean that there's no Model 2.
I don't know. I don't know because I think the stock is headed to less than 100, maybe $50 per share anyway. I don't know what's going to be the trigger. It's hard to kind of the bubble has popped. the bubble has popped, and there's going to be a lot of news in the along the way, but who knows what's driving exactly what. All right. With that, thank you very much, everybody. And I will chat with you all next time. Take care.